Alright, good morning ladies and gents. Welcome back to my home kitchen, having to record this over the weekend. Today we are going to be doing our lab for beef. We are going to be doing a Korean style beef noodle dish. Now, so far in this class we have done a chicken cacciatore, which was using a tender cut of meat. Then we did roasted chicken legs, which is a tough cut of meat. Now we're going to go with an in-between cut. Originally when we were talking about our proteins, we were talking about there's 3 different cuts: tender, tough, and in-between. Really haven't focused too much on the in-between. That's what we're going to be focused on today. Alright, for the ingredients. Now, the ingredients here, I'm doubling up from the recipe just because it's a little easier for me to do that. But the amounts you're going to need are 3 ounces of either cellophane or rice noodles. Now, cellophane and rice noodles, those aren't necessarily the same thing. They are, if you're looking for the noodles that I'm using here, here's the style here. Hold on, let me just make sure that's a camera. Okay. Important thing here, just because this is not the same thing as pasta made from wheat flour, just make sure you're reading the directions on back. Some noodle types will need you to soak the noodles in hot water first before you use them. The brand that I'm using here is needing to be boiled just the same as regular pasta. But again, just look at the manufacturer's directions. So I'm going to need about 3 ounces of that. 3 tablespoons or so of soy sauce, 4 tablespoons of sesame seed oil. Now, if you do not have sesame seed oil, you can just use regular canola oil. Sesame seed oil is great because not only is it a good cooking oil with a high smoke point, but it's also adds a lot of flavor into dishes. So this is kind of, imagine extra virgin olive oil, but with a much higher smoke point and a much more roasted dark flavor. Now, completely optional, and I know some of you who have been here in person have definitely scrunched your nose up at this ingredient. I'm going to add in a couple dashes of fish sauce to this. Again, you don't have to go with this one, but trust me, in this dish it's really good. 1 clove of garlic, and we're going to mince that. 2 tablespoons of either brown sugar or honey. Again, just kind of what your personal preference is as far as flavor. 1 tablespoon of either apple cider vinegar or lime juice. Again, your choice here, but do keep in mind the acid in this dish is not optional. The acid will not only form a little bit of flavor for the sauce, but it's also going to help tenderize our in-between cut. Speaking of which, we have our main protein for today. So you are going to need anywhere from 6 to 8 ounces of skirt steak. Now, skirt steak is on the belly section or near the belly chest section of the cow. Now, on a cow, that just kind of hangs loose. However, it is attached and very close to the rib section of the cow. Because the ribs are always breathing, the skirt section is going to be doing some work. However, it's not going to be quite a ton of work like a really tough cut. So with in-between cuts, you kind of are wanting to use dual methods as far as cooking prep. Here we're going to help tenderize this using a marinade, very acidic marinade. And then we are going to then use high, fast, dry heat in order to then stir fry this and cook that. So we're kind of using 2 methods, both marinating and also stir frying. Okay, you're going to need half of a yellow onion, and I'll show you how to cut that. Kosher salt, you'll always need that. 4 ounces of mushrooms, whether it's shiitake or here I've got whole but regular white button mushrooms. You're going to need half a cup of shredded carrots. Now, you can buy that at the store, or you can just take up 2 or so carrots and just shred those yourselves. And then, one produce item that we are going to be working with is this. This is bok choy. Now, I'm not sure if you're able to see that on camera. That's spelled B-O-K Choy. Now, I really love this vegetable. Not only, does it have a bunch of different textures, from the stem to the leaves. You can prepare it in a bunch of different ways, from stir fries to salads, to serve it completely raw. It really is good at soaking up flavor and going with the flavor of whatever you cook it in. So if you're normally not a huge fan of leafy greens, this is a good starting point. I'm going to show you how to prepare this. If you do not have access to bok choy, or you quite frankly don't want to go with bok choy, that's fine. You can substitute this with spinach. I would say about 3 to 4 ounces of spinach. Again, that you may want to eyeball. For the bok choy, we're going to need about 1 or 2 stalks here. I'm going to show you how to wash that and prepare that. And then you're going to need 1 or half a tablespoon or more, again, depending on personal preference, of ginger root. I'll show you how to prepare that. And then finally, any sort of items that you need for garnish. Here I'm going to be using green onions and limes. You can use sesame seeds, sriracha, crushed and toasted peanuts, or anything like that. Cilantro, whatever you'd like. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started, and yeah, we'll go from there. Alright, our first step here is to cook and treat the noodles. So again, you have to follow the directions that are on the package of what you're using. Here the package is telling me to boil in a lightly salted water for about 4 to 6 minutes. So I'm going to sit that in. I'm just going to cook this cook this very similar to how I would regular pasta. So I'll cook this for about 5 minutes or so, and then I will set the noodles aside. Okay, later what I'm going to do is I'm going to be stir frying this and tossing this with everything else. So I'll be back when these are done. In the meantime, you're going to want to prep your stalks of bok choy. Here, when you pull them back, you'll see there's a bunch of dirt right here. All you want to do is just make sure you scrub and rinse that off. Have a strainer here ready to go, and then you'll be ready to set these aside. Do the same thing with your mushrooms and the carrots. I'm going to take care of that off camera here while I'm waiting for the noodles to boil. And with mushrooms, you have to remember to always rinse these off. They are grown in dirt and compost, so you always want to make sure to rinse these off. Alright, now with the noodles done, just going to drain those and just set that aside. Okay, so that is step 1 done. Now we're going to go to step 2, which is our vegetable prep. Alright, from here we're going to go to step 2, which is to prepare all of our produce items. Now, each of these requires just a slightly different prep here, so we're just going to go down the list here. So first we're going to start with our bok choy. Now we want to separate this into 2 sections, the leaves and then the stem. So first thing I'm going to do is just cut off the fibrous root end, which is not that nice to eat here. So put the garlic to the side. Okay, and I'm going to just very finely, almost into a julienne, chop the bok choy. So just cut it very, very thinly. That way it cooks a little more quickly. And as this cooks down, this will have a nice pleasant crunch in the final dish here. Now, I'm going to do that. Now with the leaves part, I can chop that a little bit more coarsely. Still want to chop it pretty fine here. Again, we are going to be cooking this fairly quickly. So, alright, now for that, I'm going to put that into a separate bowl here. Okay, keep keeping everything nice and organized. Okay, so there's my bok choy prepped and ready to go. All right, for the mushrooms, I'm going to slice those into thin strips. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't like mushrooms, especially for those of you who are in person here, and you want to have the ability to kind of remove those, you can quarter these instead of slicing them. So you take the mushroom and you cut it in half and then slice it in half this way. This way it's a little easier to remove. Actually, you know what? Upon second consideration, that's what I'm going to do. So I guess the final texture of the mushrooms is up to you. If you cut, if you want to be able to pick them out and you want a little bit more meatiness to them, cut them into quarters. If you want to slice them, you just cut off a little piece and then go right through. I'm going to cut them into quarters just because I think the texture of the quarters will be a little bit nicer, nicer contrast, so that's what I'm going to do. So just standing it up, slice in half, turn it 90 degrees, slice in half again. Okay, and I'm just going to go through all of these. All right. Now my mushrooms are prepared. I'm going to just use the same container that they came in, just keep everything nice and organized. Now, one thing just to keep in mind, I have rinsed those. I have rinsed the container out as well, just because obviously there'll be some dirt in there as well. But I'm just going to use it just to keep everything nice and organized. All right. Put those to the side. Now we're going to go to the onion. Now this one should be pretty straightforward, should be pretty comfortable with this, but I'm going to slice the stem end off. So you have the stem end and then the root end. And slice the stem end off. Now, one thing you do want to be careful of, just something I've been noticing, is with all this paper and stuff, you don't want to leave that on the board, otherwise it's a physical contaminant. Plus all those fibers and stuff usually will have dirt and stuff in them. So when you make your cut down the middle, so through the root end, and when you peel back your paper, one thing you want to do is put the onion to the side and then clean off your board. So I'm going to peel that off. Okay. And I'm just going to take just a second here to completely clean the board. Okay, wipe that down. Make sure there's no paper, no fibers, no anything on the board that can eventually get into the food. Okay, so from there, I'm going to julienne this. I'm going to chop off the root end. Throw those away so that they're not in the way of anything. And I'm going to just simply make cuts inward into the onion, just into nice thin strips. When it becomes wobbly, I'm just going to move it, just flop it down. Okay, and same thing here, so I'm going to do this one a little more quickly. Alright, so there we go. So I'll put those to the side here. And yes, I am using quite a few bowls here, but again, that's just what I'm doing here, just to keep everything nice and organized here for you guys, and just for me as well. Alright, now for the garlic, that one, I'm just going to again cut the root end off, take my knife, just give it a little press down, and then I'm just going to mince that super finely here. Now, as I'm chopping and I'm just moving around a lot here, just one little trick of how my board is staying in place. I've got a paper towel, just a little bit damp, just run underneath the board so it's not going anywhere. Now this one, For the garlic, I'm actually going to put this right into my bowl, which I've already measured out the soy sauce that I'm going to need. So I'm just going to put it directly in there. Okay, and set that to the side. Now for the ginger. Now, a lot of you have probably never used, or most of you may not have experience working with regular ginger. So how I'm going to prep that, hold on one sec. Alright, sorry about that, just checking the camera here. Okay, so you have your piece of ginger here. What you're going to want to do is just get about a inch-sized piece and then mince that. Now, the way you want to do that is you want to peel this. Now, you can use a vegetable peeler, but you can also just use a spoon. The skin on ginger is usually soft enough that you can just scrape with a spoon. Or what you can do here is you can just take a knife and just kind of slice off kind of a piece of ginger here, and then just kind of carefully slice the skin right off. Now, you're not going to get quite as nice of it, or quite as much yield on this, meaning you are going to waste a little bit. So for those of you who are working in restaurants, for these sort of things, always listen to your chef on what they want you to do. I'm just going with this because, again, I'm at home, so I'm not particularly worried about it, but again, just always listen to what your chef tells you. Okay, now for the mince here, so I've got a little block of ginger here. For the mince, you can just kind of cut pieces and then rock your knife back and forth. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this into a very fine brunoise. So I'm going to take my knife and I'm just going to slice into very, very thin sheets, almost like half the width of a brunoise. Very fine here. Okay. And now what I'll do is I'll take my ginger. I'll take each part and cut that into very fine little matchsticks. Okay, so just to kind of show that here, so I have my little sheets of ginger. I'm going to stack those up and then make a few little cuts. Okay. Okay, see that a little closer up here. So you have your sheets. You're just going to make a couple slices right down. Then you'll turn it 90 degrees and then very finely mince that. Okay, now if you're not super confident about your skills with mincing and with doing what I'm showing here, you don't have to, worry about this much. You can just take your knife and just go back and forth here. Again, I'm just kind of showing some nice skills here. And I'm just cutting this very, 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 very finely. Okay, I'll need about a spoonful, half a tablespoon of ginger for this. But again, that one you can kind of eyeball. Don't really, stress yourself out about, very fine measurements and everything. Again, this is cooking. It's not baking and pastry. You don't need to be precise and exact here. You can make adjustments. All right. So I'm going to put this to the side. Okay, so I've got this. I'll put this to the side. Go on to my next piece of produce, which is my carrots. So here I can just simply grate this on a box grater. I'm just going to top and tail the carrots here. And then you can just simply take the carrot and just grate it on the box grater until you have about half of a cup. Now, if you don't have a box grater, you can do this by hand. So what you can do is just cut it super, super finely. I'm going to take my carrot, cut it right down the middle, and I'm going to cut this into a very fine, very, very fine julienne, into very small pieces. Again, this is not quite as good as grating, so I'm going to grate the rest of this, but I'm just showing you can do this. Here, if you do cut the carrots into pieces instead of using a box grater, when we get to the step where you're going to be cooking your carrots, you may want to cook the carrots for an extra minute or two longer than everything else just to soften that up. But for me, I'm just going to go with this. All right, and there's my carrots. And my last ingredient here is going to be my green onion. And I'm going to use this just as a garnish at the very, very end. So what I'm going to do is I want to cut that very, very, very thinly, because if I have giant pieces here, that's going to be a little too crunchy and raw for this. Whereas if I cut it very thinly, it'll just kind of dissolve in the final dish. So I'm just going to line it up just like I have here, and I'm just going to very finely just go through. Alright, and there we have it. Okay, sorry, we have two other things here. So I'm just going to take a little bit of cilantro. Again, this is my garnish. Now for this, I'm not going to cut this super fine. I'm just going to give it a rough cut just across the top here. And then put that into the same bowl as my green onions. Okay, now we're going to take care of the beef. Alright, now I'm going to take care of my beef here. Now, again, if you've paid attention here, you probably noticed I took care of the vegetables first. Now I'm going to the raw meat here. Now, for here, you can either use skirt steak or what is sold oftentimes as stir-fry steak. Now, they are not the same thing here, but both will work in this application. So I'm just going to show this to the camera real quick. Okay, so here's our stir-fry meat. This is what I'm using here today. Now, you can see it is not the same thing as skirt steak. However, this is also an in-between cut that will work for this. Now, this cut is a little easier to find in stores. Sometimes it's a little less expensive than skirt steak. If you use skirt steak, you're going to want to cut it fairly thinly here. So what you'll see is you'll see the steak, you'll see a few little lines going through it. That is known as the grain. That's just the grains of the muscle. What you're going to do is you're going to cut it in thin strips across that grain, meaning perpendicular 90 degrees across it. You don't want to cut with the grain, rather cut across it. If you're confused on that, just talk to me and I can help you out. Now for here, what I'm just going to simply do for the beef prep here is I'm just going to slice this right in half into smaller pieces here. Okay, so that is it as far as step 2. We've gotten our vegetables and our protein prepped and ready to go. And now we're ready to go with our marinade and then start cooking. Now you see here, I've got everything organized, ready to go. Alright, so step 3 is I'm going to combine the soy sauce, the garlic. I'm going to put in about 2 tablespoons of the sesame oil into here. Again, I'm eyeballing that. The brown sugar. Again, you can use honey for this. And then either the lime juice or the apple cider vinegar into here. So we're going to need about a tablespoon or so. Again, with cooking, you don't need to be super precise. Okay, So I'm just going to simply mix and stir that together. Set that aside. Now I'm going to marinate the beef. So I'm going to take the beef, put that into my bowl, wash my hands real quick, and now I'm going to toss in about 1 or 2 tablespoons of the marinade into my beef mixture here, and just simply stir that together and set aside. Now you can do this well ahead of time. You can do this hours ahead of time. Just keep this either covered or in a Ziploc bag, or you can just let it sit for about 10 minutes or so. By the time we finish cooking everything else and we add in the beef, it'll be marinated enough here. But the main thing of what's happening here is I'm just going to add a little bit more of the marinade. So maybe up that to about 2 or 3 tablespoons or so. Is the acid that is in our marinade from the vinegar is going to slightly tenderize and slightly break down some of the proteins, the tougher proteins that are in this meat. So when we go to saute it, there'll be a little bit, there'll be some more tenderness in there, and it's not going to be super gristly and tough. All right, so once I've done that, let's go to our next step. All right, so we're ready to cook. My pan's been slightly charging for a couple of minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour in a little bit of sesame oil into the pan here. Oh, let me get rid of the water here, because having oil and water together is never a fun thing. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a little bit of sesame oil into the pan, and I'm going to saute the onions over high heat. Now, this is a stir fry, so that's why I've been really emphasizing making sure everything is nice and organized. Oh, by the way, in the marinade, I also made sure to add a little bit of fish sauce in there. So, just as a side note for those of you who are here in person and got to smell the fish sauce. Anyway, okay, so here we go. So everything's organized, ready to go. I'm going to add in a spoon, about 2 teaspoons or so of sesame oil, and add in my onions, along with a good pinch of kosher salt. Okay, you want to stir fry this about medium-high heat. Okay. Now for this, yes, there is a lot of steam and a little bit of smoke, but mostly steam coming off of this. That's okay. That's exactly what you want. So I'm going to stir fry the onions here for about 2 minutes before I go on to my next step. Alright, so I've got my onions cooking, got a little bit of caramelization on them. Now I'm going to add in my beef, and I'm going to stir fry that on high heat just until the beef is cooked through. So same thing, just stir it around a lot, move it around the pan a lot. Alright, so this is just cooked through. You may see a little bit of pink still in the meat. That is okay. With carryover cooking, that will be fine. So now what I'm doing here is I have a bowl set to the side here, and I'm just going to set aside the beef and the onions just on the side. Now, I'm going to put the same pan that has all this fond and brown bits on the bottom. I'm going to put that back on the heat here. Move the camera down here. I'm going to add in a little bit more oil, and then I'm going to add in the mushrooms. And I'm just going to stir fry that until it's nice light brown. Oop, lost one mushroom there. Add in a tiny bit of salt in there. And we'll be back in a couple minutes. You'll see as the mushrooms cook, they're going to release a lot of water and they'll shrink a lot. That's fine. You just want to continue cooking until that water kind of goes away. Okay, when the mushrooms are nice and brown, I'm going to add in my carrots here. Now, again, for you, if you had to cut your carrots by hand, you probably want to add this a little bit before the mushrooms are done. Just to let them soften up a little bit. But I'm just going to stir this and just stir fry it a little bit, scraping the bottom of the pan just until the carrots soften, about a minute or two after the mushrooms are done. And then I'm going to set them aside in the same bowl that I have the beef and everything sitting in. All right, now that that is done, I'm going to set this to the side. Add this on top of the beef here. Alright, now to the bok choy. So, if need be, I'm going to add it just in a little more oil. And how I'm going to cook this is I'm going to just stir fry the stems just for a minute or so. Because they're a little bit harder, I want to give them a little bit of a head start here. So, just going to let that go. Just for a couple seconds here. Then, I'm going to add in my ginger in there, and right away you should be able to smell the ginger. And then I'm going to add in the rest of my soy sauce marinade mixture. Okay. And I'm going to let that cook for about a minute here, just to let the stems soften a bit. Alright, now that I've let this cook for a minute or so, I'm going to add in the leaves. Let those tenderize a bit. And then in goes my cooked noodles into the mixture. And I'm just going to heat this until the stems and the leaves tenderize. The noodles have kind of soaked up some of the flavor. And then we are nearly finished. If you're using spinach leaves, then you would skip the step where you're putting in the stems. You would just add in your ginger and the soy sauce mixture right away. And then add in the leaves, let them tenderize, and then add in your noodles. All right, here, once I see there's not really much wet marinade left in the pot, I'm going to add in everything that's been left over on the side, the beef, the carrots, everything, onions, and I'm going to just turn the heat off, let this come up to temperature, just heat through. And then the most important step, obviously, in anything like this is to always taste it. Here, I guarantee you it's going to need something. It's either going to need salt, sweetness, acidity, or savoriness. A bit of noodles and beef on there. Those are the two things that'll soak up the most flavor, so it'll give you the best gauge of this. Alright, to me that just needs a little squeeze of acidity and just to bump up the savoriness, just a little bit of fish sauce, again, just a splash or two. There we go. All right, now this is ready to serve. Okay, now I just got my plate, and I'll just spoon generous portion here. Now, for me, in hindsight, I probably cooked the rice noodles just a little bit too much, so they are breaking apart a little bit, but that's okay. So, hindsight, for you guys who are going to be cooking this in person, you probably want to cook the rice noodles for only about 4 or 5 minutes. Okay, and then I'm going to simply garnish this with some chopped green onion, very thinly sliced. A little bit of cilantro, just right over the top. This one noodle is bothering me. It's that place. And then just a couple of lime wedges just on the side. All right, and then you can serve this family style. Just put it in the center of the table and everyone can kind of help themselves, or if you'd like to give everyone their own portion, you can. All right, so that is our lab today. Make sure your mise en place sheets are filled in. I know this was a lot of steps here today, so believe me, if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to help out. For those of you who are here in person, make sure that you reread and understand every step of this process. All right? Okay, with that, that is it. Take care, and I'll see you back in class.